Hey guys, it's Anna from Bright Lane Gardens, and today we are designing a full shade landscaped area of my yard that is going to be landscaped, of course, with native plants. For those of you that don't know the history of the property that we moved into, it was landscaped to a T, and it was truly beautiful landscaping. But slowly but surely, we've been trying to rewild or revamp some of these existing flower beds into native flower beds. Along with that, of course, comes with picking and choosing some existing plants that we wanted to keep. So this native plot today is going to do a great job of showing you a couple established plants that we planned on keeping in that landscaping, even though they're not native, and adding other plants, other new native plants around those existing trees. So here's a video of this landscaped area that we are going to redo here. I've already removed the existing plants. There was actually weed fabric on top of these, so I'm dealing with a little bit of a poorer soil structure than I normally would because leaves and sticks and other
Another
organic
thing that you'll
debris
notice
didn't
about
have the
this
ability
area
to break
is
down into
there are
the soil
two
like we
very
typically
large
would
hydrangea
without
trees.
landscape
These
fabric.
hydrangea trees are extremely established. They were planted long before we moved to this property. They were probably planted close to when I was born. They are so established. I would put them at maybe 25 years old, if not more. But at their tallest point, they're about 10 feet tall. The canopy stands at least 3 to 4 feet off the ground. So really established trees. Hydrangeas, of course, are not native to North America. They're not native to Michigan. But they are not considered invasive. And we love these trees. They're beautiful. They attract a ton of hummingbirds, a ton of bees, other pollinators, and they also attract other birds during the winter season. So we love these trees. We want to keep them. My goal is to landscape with them instead of removing them. A couple things to keep in mind when you're landscaping around existing trees or shrubs like this. Now, you want to decide whether or not you're going to keep them as the focal point. Clearly, these are huge trees. They are absolutely stunning when they're in bloom, and we do want to keep these as the focal point of our landscaped area. So I have two focal points that I want to landscape around. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that there's going to be a lot of roots around these trees, and they're going to be close to the surface of the soil, as hydrangeas do typically produce roots that are closer to the surface of the soil. So it is going to impact my ability to plant plants around the trees. I'm going to have to select smaller plants or plants with a smaller root system than I typically would in a wide open space. So just a couple special mentions of things that we're going to want to be aware of whenever we're landscaping around existing larger plants like shrubs and trees. Lastly, this area is mostly shade. And when I say mostly shade, I mean it is shade from sun up all the way through pretty much 2 hours until sundown. So it might get 90 minutes to 2 hours worth of sunshine in the late evening. But certainly nothing that's going to really encourage a full sun or even a partial sun plant to bloom. So I'm looking exclusively for full shade plants for this area. And in doing so, then I can guarantee myself some really lovely blooms no matter how much sunshine is offered in this area. I will add there's a little bit of dappled sunlight maybe through the branches throughout the day, but again, it's just not enough to support even a partial sun plant. Landscaping around these hydrangea trees, these of course are going to be my focal point for what I'm doing today, and I want to really create a cascading effect or really utilize the height of my plants to help draw your eye to these hydrangea trees. They're beautiful on their own. They're obviously a very large plant, but there's a lot that we can do with the way that we structure some of our other landscaped plants to really help draw your eye to focus on those two trees first. So we're going to practice that today. I'll show you to the best of my ability how we can draw this out on paper first before we actually go ahead and plant our plants. And from there, we'll plan out exactly what plants we're going to place and where we're going to place them. So without further ado, let's head right here and I'll show you how I draw out my landscape designs on paper before I actually put it in the ground. Okay, so we have our project drawn out. This is the basic shape of that section that I showed you earlier in the video. These two diamond shapes here actually represent the hydrangea trees. This would be that rock border that you saw in the video earlier here, and then in the middle, this is of course the part that we're landscaping today. I like using this grid paper anytime I'm drawing out my landscape designs. Anytime I'm designing any section of my yard, I love to draw it out first. It just gives me a way better overall view of what this is going to look like. So in this circumstance, each of these little grid squares represents half a foot. This whole section here is about 25 feet long, and then at the narrowest spot here, this is about 2 feet wide. So just to give you some reference for my measurements. Down at the bottom here, I have my list of shade-friendly plants that I can choose from that will produce blooms for me in full shade. I also have their relative heights and around what time they'll bloom here in northern Michigan. So I'm going to use all of this information to compile a very pretty landscape design in this specific area. As I said earlier, these two diamond shapes here represent those two hydrangea trees that you saw in the video. Those are going to stay there, so I'm not going to be removing those at all. I have all of this land around here to go ahead and landscape, and I need to organize it according to not only height, but shade friendliness. So one of my honorable mention plants that I'm going to start with is Foamflower. Foamflower is a very pretty flower. It gets to be about a foot tall. In sunnier areas, it can actually get upwards of 18 inches tall, but for this specific area, I think it'll be about a foot tall. It's going to bloom early for me from May to June. And the reason I'm going to start with Foamflower is because I have a limited number of Foamflowers available. I think I have 8 or 9 of these plants. So I know that that's not really going to be a symmetrical or a repeating pattern for me. So I want to start with that. My Foamflower is a really pretty flower, very showy, has a lot of blooms, mostly white with a little tinge of pink in certain areas. So I really want that to be framed, and I'm actually going to do that right in the center here. My focal point, or my point of view, is most commonly going to be coming from this direction. This area back here was actually that gravel walkway that was behind those hydrangea trees there. So it is possible to view it from the opposite direction, but I would say over 80% of the time, our point of view is actually going to be coming from the front here. So since my Foamflower is going to be about a foot or a foot and a half tall, I actually want it towards the back here, and I really want to frame it between these two hydrangea trees. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just do a little triangle shape back here. And I'm going to label it FF for my Foamflower. So that right there is going to be the only location that my Foamflower will exist. Around these areas here is going to be a little bit tricky. So this is actually going to be the next area I'm going to choose my plants for. The primary reason that these areas around the hydrangea trees are going to be tricky is because I have really, really established hydrangea roots around those trees. And I really want to damage as few of those as possible. It's inevitable that I'm going to cut some of the smaller ones, of course. But these are really mature, really established trees. So there's going to be a lot of root growth down here that I need to deal with. So I don't really want a mature plant to put in there. I want to work with a plug. And I do have a few different varieties of plugs, but the plug that I'm going to work with in these specific areas is my wild strawberry. So wild strawberry grows exactly like our cultivar strawberries that we love to produce actual fruit strawberries for us. The wild strawberry plants do produce little itty bitty strawberries on them. They have a really delicate, nice pink to white bloom that will bloom for us between April and June. And these stay nice and low to the ground, usually about 6 inches above the ground. They spread via those stolons, so they'll actually kind of sprout up these new leaves. They'll fall back down, start new roots there, do it again, do it again. So they're a really good ground cover. They're a great option, really great native ground cover if you really want something that's going to suppress weeds and cover up your dirt, but something that you don't really have to mulch around. So wild strawberry is going to be an excellent choice. I have an entire flat of those. They're all in plugs that start out about probably 3.5 inches deep, and they're about that big around. So they're a nice small plant that won't be too hard to get in between the roots here. Now the question is, how far outside of these bounds do I want the wild strawberries to exist? And that I'm not too sure about yet. So I'm actually going to hold off on that, but I do know that in the middle here and around these edges here is going to be my wild strawberry. So I'll at least label that for now. When it comes to native gardens, I think there's a lot that can be said about symmetry. Symmetry means that one side somewhat reflects the other side. With any native garden and any cottage garden vibe, I do like to discourage against exact symmetry. So exact symmetry would mean this side here is exactly equal to this side here. Well, given the shape of this garden already, it's already not symmetrical. So what I really want to focus on with this symmetry is that I'm repeating the plants that I use here into this section over here. So while the shape and the number of plants might not be identical on either side, the repeating of those specific types of plants will be symmetrical. So when I talk about symmetry in a native garden, I usually mean that we're repeating some of the same colors and patterns on one side that we have on the other side. Another design concept that I want to talk about here is using layers or heights to really develop depth into our landscaped area. So for example, with this wild strawberry that I'm going to plant in the front here, and the foamflower that I'm going to plant in the back here, combined with the height of these taller, more established hydrangea trees, I'm basically creating 3 different layers here. I've got my 6-inch layer of my wild strawberry that stays nice and low to the ground. It's my ground cover. And then I have my foot to 18-inch tall foamflower that's going to stand up a little bit taller and give some nice height. And then I have the lower part of the canopy of those hydrangea trees, and those are probably 3-ish feet off the ground. So I really have 3 distinct layers that I'm working with. One concept that I want to encourage you to follow is the concept of contrast. And with contrast, that basically means that something is easily distinguishable from the other thing that's right next to it. When you're working under the canopy of trees, like these hydrangea trees, it's very tempting to select a plant that might be a little bit taller because you're thinking, hey, these hydrangea trees here are really tall. They're like 10 feet tall at the top of them. So we could really go with some taller plants. But in reality, it's going to be better if you actually stick with a little bit of a shorter plant to offer this really good contrast between this is the tree and this is the upper part of my perennial plants that are planted below it. So I don't want to go any taller than that 18-inch mark, which would be the upper end of this foamflower here. I want to stay a little bit lower. I want there to be a nice gap between the top of my tallest plant and the bottom of the canopy of that hydrangea tree. So sticking with that rule and knowing that these hydrangea tree canopies go out on either side by several feet, I'm going to select a plant that doesn't get more than about 18 to 20 inches tall. So I think for my next set of plants on either side of my hydrangea trees here, I would like to go with my hairy Beardtongue, which should stick right around that 18-inch mark, especially when it's in full shade like this. Hairy Beardtongue is a super versatile plant. It can handle quite a bit of sun. It can also handle quite a bit of shade, and it'll bloom about the same in both. So if you're looking for a really versatile plant that can handle a lot of different sun, shade, and soil requirements, Hairy Beardtongue is a really good option for you. My hairy Beardtongue is going to bloom midsummer, usually May through June in northern Michigan, so it'll be a nice separation from the wild strawberry, which starts blooming in April, and my foamflower is going to be blooming around the same time here. I know that I want my hairy Beardtongue to definitely be right at the other side of this wild strawberry here, so I'm gonna do a nice little curve because anytime we're working with native plants, we want to have nice natural shapes and forms. We don't like to have a lot of perfectly straight lines because we're working with a wild plant and we want to rewild our yard. So we want organization while allowing a lot of flexibility for adaptation as well. Then I think I'll do a little section here. So we'll do HB for our hairy Beardtongue. So here's my hairy Beardtongue section over here, and I definitely want another section of it over on this side. I think we'll end our wild strawberry there. Sometimes it's easier to draw out the shapes of what things are going to look like before you actually label what's going to go there. So I'm going to use this section here for my other area of hairy Beardtongue. And now we've got a little bit more of a defined section here. I know that I want to add at least 2 more types of flowers here. I've only got room for 1 here, so I'm actually going to divide this one more time. Let's do a nice circular shape here. All right, so by the time we hit our hairy Beardtongue on either side, we're starting to escape the canopy of these hydrangea trees finally. So now we get to start increasing the height of our perennials because we're outside of that canopy area for these hydrangea trees. I'm gonna go a little bit taller than my hairy Beardtongue, but I also wanna switch up the color because I have a white bloom on my wild strawberry. I have a white to pink bloom on my foamflower. I have a white to purple bloom on my hairy Beardtongue. So I really want to get out of these whites. I have a lot of white going on here. And the furthest I can get from white is red. So I'm actually going to move on to my wild Columbine, which can grow up to 30 inches. However, in the shade, it's actually going to stay a lot closer to 20 to 25 inches, which will be ideal for this next layered section here and here. Wild Columbine is another really versatile plant, just like your hairy Beardtongue, that can bloom in sun or shade, and it can handle a wide range of soil conditions. It also does a really good job of self-seeding itself. So once you get a patch of it established in your yard, you'll start to notice it kind of pop up in some other areas, which if you're a native gardener like I am, you might love that. I do really love seeing it pop up in other areas. So pretty. It has a really unique shaped kind of rocket bloom on it that's red and yellow. Huge hit with the hummingbirds as well, and a lot of butterflies, of course. Wild Columbine is also a really long bloomer. It can bloom usually starting in April, and I've seen them go all the way through July before. So we're talking about several months of really pretty recurring blooms. Okay, so my last section that I have here is the furthest on the right and the furthest on the left. This is, of course, getting as far away from those hydrangea trees as possible, so I can feel free to add a little bit of height on either side here. There's a couple things I want to focus on. First and foremost, my bloom times. I'm having a lot of really early bloom times. So Foamflower starts in May, hairy Beardtongue starts in May, my wild strawberry starts in April, and my wild Columbine also starts in April. So the beginning of our summer season, we've got totally covered with blooms. This area is just going to come to life. What I really want is a later blooming perennial at this point. Another thing that I would really like is some different colors. So my Big Leaf Aster is actually going to cross all of those off my list. My Big Leaf Aster can get up to 3 feet tall. Again, being in full shade, he might stay a little bit shorter this time around, but that's okay too. And it's going to have more of a purple or blue tinge to it, which I don't have anything in this area that really has that color scheme. So Big Leaf Aster is going to be a great option. The Big Leaf Aster is really the one that blooms in the shade. So if you're looking for an aster but you get quite a bit of shade, the Big Leaf Aster is going to be the one for you. The one thing that drawing a landscape map like this doesn't do for you is it doesn't do a good job of showing you those layers that I was talking about earlier in terms of the height of your plant. And I cannot emphasize how important planning around the heights of your plants are. So really my goal for this, and I can kind of show this on another sheet of paper. Give me just a minute and I'll draw this part out. Okay, as I've always said before, follow me for my gardening skills, not for my drawing skills, but I'm gonna do just kind of a basic representation of what we're working with here. So this is hydrangea tree number 1, this is hydrangea tree number 2. In the middle here, this is going to be this middle section here, and then of course on the outer sides is going to be the plants that I have planted outside of that canopy there. So when I talk about the height and depth of this particular area, I'm looking at it from my point of view, and I'm looking at all these different layers of plants. So I talked about planting those shorter. We're just going to do this for our wild strawberry. I know it's not at all what they look like, but I have my shorter ground cover here. This is my wild strawberry. It's only going to get to be about 6 inches tall. We'll go ahead and label it there. In the center portion here, we're going to start to see our foamflower develop for us. And this is going to get about 12 to 18 inches tall. None of this is to scale, of course. This is just to kind of show you what I'm talking about. The wild strawberry does continue a little bit outside of the canopy of these trees, so I'm still saving this gap here because I don't want to overwhelm this area. I want to make sure that I have really good contrast between these two things. So look at all of that contrast between the bottom of this tree and the top of this plant here. Really good gap, really good contrast there. And then next I'm going to move on to my next tallest plant, which is going to be my hairy Beardtongue. And hairy Beardtongues don't look anything like that, but if you use your imagination, they possibly could. And then my next plant is going to be my wild Columbine. My wild Columbine is going to get even taller than that. We'll use this for my wild Columbine. And last on my list, I ran out of room on this side, but basically my Big Leaf Aster is going to be the biggest plant yet. So when I talk about this height differential, you see here, I allowed it to go up a little bit in the middle, so I allowed it to get a little bit of height right there, but then I crescendoed it right back down to enable this contrast under the canopy of these trees here. And then after I get past that canopy, I went ahead and chose some taller plants. So I said, okay, now we can bring the height back up, back up, back up, back up, back up, back up. So when you look from this perspective, I have this nice little scoop here, and you can kind of see that all of these plants are going to follow this basic shape that I have created to enable these hydrangea trees to still maintain that central focus. So these are still my focal point. Even though I added in all these plants around them, I'm still maintaining that central focal point on both of these trees. And using plants with different height variations like that do so much to add a lot of depth, especially if you have a small yard. You really want to focus on the height of your plants, because that's what's going to add this depth to your yard, and it's going to take a two-dimensional drawing and bring it to life in your yard when you really focus on incorporating plants of different heights into your yard appropriately. So I hope that offers a little better perspective on what I'm talking about when I'm talking about focusing on contrasts. Here's my contrast here and here, and using different height plants to create a shape that truly draws the eye to your dedicated focal points. As always, I'm going to color code this one because color coding it seems to bring it to life on paper. So give me just a couple minutes while I color code this. I have everything colored in here. This is obviously not a mandatory part of the process, but I do think that coloring it in helps you identify if you have too much of one color or maybe not enough of another color, or if you're trying to represent a certain pattern. It's a little easier to catch with your eye when you have it color coded like this. So I try to stick as close to the bloom colors as I can. Obviously white makes it a little tricky, but a lot of whites aren't true whites, so we can use whatever hue they tend to lean towards. So my next step is, of course, to plant all of these plants. And I do like to cut this process in half because the design process is a whole process on its own. And then, of course, planting is a whole day of dedication, if not more, to all of the work that you already put in on designing it. So at this point, our process is done for today. That's all I have for you today on my full shade landscape design process. I hope that you enjoy these types of videos. I know I sure enjoy doing this on paper and showing you guys what my process is. Native plants are such an incredible landscape tool that is so underutilized and so needed. Our insect population needs them. Our local ecosystem needs these native plants to survive. So I really hope with all of these video tutorials that I'm doing that it encourages people to plant more native plants and give them a chance. I know that they have a more wild appearance than a lot of these other cultivars that we've gotten way too used to here in the United States. So I really hope that this can encourage people to garden more with native plants and show you that you can organize a very beautiful, very organized and detailed garden with native plants as long as you take the time to plan it out on paper first. If you have any questions about my design process or any of the plants that I was using today, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section below. I love to talk about native plants literally anytime, so anything that you have for me, go ahead and leave it in the comments. If you are interested in native gardening and want to learn more, we have an entire playlist committed to native gardens and native plants. Check it out on our YouTube channel. We're also on Facebook and Instagram as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video today. I hope you learned a lot from it, and it really does help out small businesses like ours. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate the time that you spent on our channel, and I sure hope to catch you next time. Bye-bye.